This is a great start. He's
Hello
muted!
and welcome back. Ha! Hello and welcome back to another episode of Freeformers Unplugged, live on LinkedIn, 1 p.m. UK time every Friday, and available wherever you get your podcasts, but primarily Spotify, where you can hear and see us talk every week about a given topic. And every so often, we are very, very lucky to be joined by an awesome guest. We don't have guests every week because I'll be honest, there are loads of people who want to get on podcasts, and we don't want everyone. We want only the best. And we do have one of the best with us today. But before we introduce our incredible guest, as ever, I'm joined by Emily. Emily, how you doing?
I'm good. A little bit chaotic today. I'm actually off today. Kids are home. So I'm a little bit like, oh, I've forgotten who I am and what I do. So hopefully you'll get some great, insightful questions. If not, please do all put your own questions in the comments to make up for my scattiness today.
Absolutely. Let us know where in the world you're joining from. We get a pretty broad reach here at Freeformers Unplugged. So, yeah, if you do let us know where you're from as well, that would be awesome, just so we know where in the world we are streaming to right at the moment. But Emily, who have we got joining us today?
Well, I'm really excited by this one, Toby. We are joined by Maria James, founder of Trust by Design, developer of the Doughnut Principle. I'm sure we're going to hear quite a lot about that as we go through, but also a leadership expert. She spent more than 2 decades helping so many different types of organization. I mean, talk about squiggly careers. We are all over the place here. It's so excited to get into the weeds of this, but helping organizations navigate change, building trust, and leading effectively under pressure. So, Maria, welcome along to Freeformers Unplugged.
Thank you so much, Toby and Emily, for inviting me.
Well, it's lovely to have you here. So, just to start, I mean, who is Maria James? What makes you tick? And give us the download, the TLDR of who you are and what you're all about.
Oh, can I summarize that in 2 minutes? Let's see. So I think my main driver is around people. I've always loved being around people and learning and fascinated by behavior. And having served on 2 front lines, one in Basra, Iraq, with the Royal Military Police as a reservist, and then in corporates, there's so much commonality around how people show up for each other when pressure hits. And I think that's been something I've studied for the 2 decades I've been in corporates around what are those things we can do to sort of be a better person, but also be there for others during that time. And, psychology has been another driver for me, fascinated about that and how the whole ecosystem of work supports you to really thrive and be at your best. And that's why I've chosen culture and transformation really as my career of choice.
Which of those is easier, managing people in the military or managing culture of organizations?
You'll laugh at this. So actually, I thrived the most in a war zone. And to answer your question, I think the reason I thrived and I found it easier was because the behaviors were consistent and they were predictable. So often when we're under pressure, we tend to lose that perspective of like who we are and grounded in those values, because often those behaviors change unexpectedly. But I think in the military, because you all taught a base standard of how you show up repeatedly, when pressure hits, those behaviors kick in. And that's what helps you be consistent in those scenarios. So when your training kicks in automatically and the person next to you shows up with those same behaviors, that psychological safety really reinforces for you to then be able to do what you need to do, if that makes sense. So I think the difference I see in corporates and why it's been a bit of a challenge is that psychological safety isn't consistent because the showing up of different leaders, different levels is all over the place. Although we say one universal set of values, that's actually not the case in terms of how you show up at different situations. So military was easier, and I suppose that's my mission now, bringing that into corporates and culture transformation. That's standard.
It's very weird. So we did an episode talking about why people in hospitality or who have been in hospitality are better people, and having been a chef myself, the irony isn't lost on me that it's a brigade, right? So even some of the terminology is the same, but the kind of the procedural rigor and kind of boundaries which you operate within the kitchen, I'm not saying are the same as the military, but they are well defined. Everyone has their own back, and working in the kitchen during a busy service is pressure. Again, very different type of pressure to work in the military. I'm not trying to draw comparisons, but the structure and the pressure are both there, like I say, in those different ways. And I still maintain that some of the best teams I've worked in have been those in kitchens, and certainly the best leaders, because they understand intuitively the pressure and those boundaries and how to get the best out of people. So, what makes it more challenging then in the world of work, in like a corporate environment? What forces go against you that make it more difficult?
I think defining the behaviours. So what's the expectation? If if anything we design in the workplace, whether it's a transformation or we've got a set of values, I think we need to be quite explicit about what's the expectation. How do we want people to show up? What do we need them to do? And sometimes and how we interpret it can mean something very different for the other person next to us. So having that clear, explicit definition of what is it we expect, I think gets everyone on that same page, and then we can sort of maintain that consistency that we need.
It's interesting because I I think in the world that we all work in, right, that most organizations, especially those above 1,000, will try and define, let's just say, purpose and values is a really easy one. Like there'll be this carte blanche approach to purpose and values, and every one of these 1,000 to 10,000 to 30,000 people is supposed to be unified by that, and that and then there's capability frameworks and all that kind of stuff that sit below it. But I suppose at a granular level, those things can't be defined by an entire organization that are applicable to everyone. It's kind of got to be defined by the leader and the teams they operate in. And so if you hand a leader this kind of, here's the values, here's the purpose, here's the mission, here's the capability framework, what are you actually asking the leader to do? Because they're trying to lead in something that is almost defined to within an inch of its life, and therefore debilitating them to be a leader, maybe?
It's around personalization, right? So how you show up as your own character, how do you interpret those values, and how do you role model those to others? And I think that's the thing. When you've got a universal set of values, how do those show up in the day-to-day smaller moments? How do you demonstrate that? And I think when you start showing it, you're then translating it rather than just talking about it. And that's where leadership is so different, because everybody's got their nuances. But I think it's that showing up. I've got this line around leadership intent is often quite positive. We have a good intent for people, we want to do the best by them. But actually, what people experience is often very different. So I think it's all about how we show up, how we role model those behaviors in our way, but still maintaining our own authenticity. So I think if you've got a workforce of 27,000 people, you've got all of your leaders, as long as they're showing up in the right way, I think you're amplifying that message quite strongly.
So linking now showing up, excuse me, linking now showing up to the Doughnut Principle. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is, what it means, and then we'll get into the kind of the nitty-gritty of what that means for leaders and how it can help them show up or help them be who they are?
Before Maria answers that question, I just want to say, I even just the name I love, right? Because I was at a networking event the other week with Maria, and it's quite easy. It's like, here's Maria, you just need to ask her about her donut. Like, it's like the best seamless intro, because like you pique someone's curiosity and it starts a conversation great. So yeah, apologies for cutting in, but I just had to share that because it's like, I think I must have done it 3 or 4 times on that boat a couple of weeks ago. So but yeah, as Emily said, please do share more about the Doughnut Principle for us.
Sure. And the reason I chose it is quite funny as well. I mean, the story I'll share, but yeah, it's a good dinner party topic. But so the donut principle was forged in Basra, actually, so in an operational environment. But the same truth I've seen across an operational environment, a war zone, to corporates over 20 years. When pressure rises, behavior becomes visible. So, who steps forward, who protects people, who hides, who takes ownership? You see whose standard is already there. And often, when pressure hits, it exposes the person. Quite the mask drops, and you get to see really, I think that real character behind it. So, we were sitting in a tent in Basra 20 years ago, 52-degree heat, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer. And we're waiting for scoff, which is the Squaddies' definition for lunch. And actually, those meal times were the only ritual that made the day feel almost normal amongst the chaos. You know, you had gunfire, often in a dull sound behind you consistently, RPGs coming in around the vicinity. And you kind of got used to it, because if you jumped every time, you would just be a nervous wreck. So I'm trying to set the scene around us waiting for lunch, and we were just queuing up, chatting. And then in front of me, I saw this donut on a metal tray, and I was like, could really do with that. I remember being quite hungry, and also then you weren't sure when your next meal you'd get it, because if you went out on patrol, you were attacked. Sometimes you were out for hours. So I'm eyeing up this donut, and then all of a sudden you hear whoosh. We all kind of look at each other. Okay, we carry on chatting. I'm still eyeing up the donut. Another whoosh comes in. This time the tent shakes. Radio stands start bursting. Take hard cover. What do? I grab the donut, get my kit on, and we start legging it to the hard cover. Now, halfway across the compound, another RPG comes in. I fall flat on my chest, my arms suspended in the air, and the donut is somehow intact. And my ground view, chest first, was the boots of my comrade in front turning around. He turned round, picked me up by the scruff of my neck like a rag doll, and we ran together to hard cover. And then inside the ISO container, which was the only place we could go for shelter, there was just silence, the breath of 7 people just thinking, what's just happened? And then someone shouts out, Jamesy got the donut. The laughter erupted. In that one moment, it was like the humanness came back to that situation where we forgot where we were, and the donut and the fun bit of me grabbing it just changed it. And it was like, we're all in this together. Anyway, a few hours later, I shared it. It was manky, sweaty, gritty. It just survived an RPG attack, but I tell you, it's the best donut I ever tasted. But we all had a bit of a laugh with it, and then that was that. So the donut really is a metaphor around earning, protecting, rebuilding trust. It works in a loop. And my comrade Dev, he made a choice in that moment to turn back for me. He didn't have a policy telling him to do it. He didn't have a process. That was his standard before the RPG landed. So I use that in businesses around, you know, who are you going to turn back for? What's the standard you hold before the pressure hits? But before it hits, you need to earn trust. You need to protect it constantly. And then we're always rebuilding it. And it works in that cycle. So that's where the donut was born.
The phrase that stuck out there as you was talking was like the normal in the chaos. So I think there's 2 moments, isn't there? The one where I'm not going to use military language because I wasn't in the military. You're waiting for lunch. You're having lunch. There's that normality, but then also, you know, when you're under hard cover and you make the one of your comrades makes a joke about the donut. Like those 2 moments of normality when in this high pressure environment, one of the most high pressure environments possible, the protection of yours and other people's lives. Is that like something that, if we fast forward to like your corporate career, do we forget those moments of normal, like those real human moments? Because I feel like Emily talks about this quite a bit, right? So we have culture building conversations. And it's where if I jump onto an online meeting, the first thing I'll try and do is like, go, we're here to do the work. What work are we doing? And then he's like, well, we'll slow down. Let's like, how are you? What, first thing on, I think it was Thursday morning when the first time we spoke this week was like, Emily paused and made sure we had that 10-minute conversation. In an online world, I know that we move at that pace where that's probably almost forgotten. But did you see that transcend itself in person environments as well, that we forget that kind of humanity to the interpersonal connections we might have at work?
I think we do sometimes. And, going back to the psychological safety piece, I think if I look at the operational environment, that is non-negotiable. Someone has your back. It's a matter of life and death consequence. In corporate, there are consequences, but they're not life and death. You have your career, your promotion, your ego. So actually, you do compromise that psychological safety for somebody else because of your own vulnerabilities. And I think trying to translate the military life and death into corporates has been the biggest challenge. And I think people do forget. We talk about psychological safety so much at work, inclusion, all of the box ticking stuff. And in reality, when pressure hits, half of that stuff goes out the door because the pressure changes. And that's the thing where self-awareness and all of those things about know thyself need to come into play, because unless you know yourself, you're unable to kind of support other people really. And but those behaviors compound and they spread where humans follow humans. So the psych safety, it starts with all of us taking that lead.
So you say that, or you said a while ago that you're always rebuilding trust and you're always, I guess, always rebuilding this psychological safety. But do you think that it can always be rebuilt indefinitely, or does there become a point where actually it's too fractured and that psychological safety, that trust is broken, and it's irreversibly broken?
Yes, I do. And I had a scenario in Iraq. So my job there, I was training the Iraqi police force. And part of that was building trust with the communities. So when Saddam Hussein was in power, they didn't have a police system. So we were teaching them actually Western policing skills that they'd never had before. And there was no trust there. And these people were going out to their communities, trying to get intelligence and rebuild confidence. And the community didn't want to know. And what we started doing was showing up consistently. Every day we would get rejection. And that consistency and showing the proof that behavior is changing actually shifted mindset of the community, where they started coming in and then slowly closer, and then giving us intelligence information. And then before you knew it, they were working with the Iraqi police and working together to rebuild their country. So I think when something is fractured or broken, you can rebuild it, but it takes a really focused, considered approach. And that consistency, and I call it radical visibility, is key to show proof, because we're constantly looking for proof. We've given you trust, now are you gonna keep it? Are you going to do me over? And so that's really, I think that conscious piece is really important.
Consistency is so key, isn't it? Like, because you get people who are the standout stars and who maybe do things incredibly and amazingly, but if it's not consistent, actually in a way that can sometimes be worse, right, than somebody who is perhaps not quite so outstanding and not quite such a star, but is there, but like you said, shows up, builds that trust. much. Would you say that that's more important in a, well, what's more important in a leader, I guess? Is it this radical visibility, this being here and being consistent, or is it more, or is there something else about, you know, being inspirational and encouraging people in that way?
I think inspiration is important, but if inspiration's got no substance behind it, it just falls. It's a bit like wallpaper, having a nice persona and actually underneath it there's nothing to it. But I think rebuilding trust is all about closing that gap about what you said and what people experience. So owning the problem, owning the challenge without being defensive.
Hmm.
And sometimes that means I got that wrong, we didn't quite get that right, we've learned from this, but admitting. And rather than deflecting, taking accountability for it and actually using that as a learning opportunity. What are we going to do differently? And I think in corporates where I've seen it work really well, so like Vodafone as an example, owning what wasn't quite right, admitting we got that wrong, and then actually openly keeping your people up to date about what you've changed in the behavior, in the mindset, in your processes, in your policies, so they can see that you're making that shift towards repair. And then before you know it, you've built that trust and people are back on the journey with you. And then you continue and then you continue the loop. But it's that's why I say it never stops, because it's continuous. And we sometimes think because everything's happy go lucky and it's all swimmingly smooth, it's great. But actually people are judging you more when it goes wrong. They forget about those good times quite quickly. And it's when it's restructures or you're bringing in big change, that's when they start judging. And I suppose, am I going to follow or am I just going to conform? And there's a big difference with that as well around employee loyalty and are you really getting their maximum to thrive and for you to perform as a business?
It's interesting because there, in conformity and uniformity, there is consistency, and therefore there's predictability, and all of that becomes easier to manage. But by its very nature, I suppose human nature kind of works against you in all of that. Unless everyone you hire is exactly the same, which most organizations endeavor not to do, you are kind of just bound by the warts and all of the human experience and building trust in various different ways. I think the thing that's interesting that comes up as you've both spoken is that, particularly in maybe some large consultancies, let's say, there is I'm going to call it like a dog eat dog kind of culture, right? Is that like it's a survival of the fittest? I'll try and use more cliche, shall I? But like everyone is out to become a partner. That everyone wants to progress, everyone wants to move forward, everyone wants momentum, everyone, and the person to the left or right of you is probably your direct competition for the thing you are after. And so therefore, that probably sits at odds with all the behaviors and compliance and stuff that you want, and even trust to do that if you're willing to trample over people. Now, I'm not saying that in all organizations that is how you do it, but I think we've all seen it, right? Does that happen in the military? So you can obviously progress and move up through the ranks. How do you do that in the military without seeing the person to the left or right of you as direct competition, someone you need to beat?
This is where those consistent standards come in. So in basic training, you're taught, irrespective of rank, whether it's Sandhurst officer training or junior ranks, one consistent standard. And I think the team element is key to performance. And that's why often in the military setting, you're trained for succession planning. So if your leader gets taken out, you instantly step into those shoes. Whereas in corporates, you have a year's pipeline, they train you. It's a whole different mindset. Whereas in the military, you are all even. Yes, you've got ranks, you have to have that, but it's the standard at the outset. So you all start on that same page and then you build on that. And that's the key difference, which you don't have in corporates.
And is that down to it might be down to both, but like there's an expectation that, like the phrase you use, right, succession planning, that succession planning is just part of your operating model. You have to have that in there, because if something goes wrong and you don't have that, then what do? You can't just figure it out on the fly, because lives are at risk, in some instances. Like, whereas you say in a corporate environment, you don't prepare for that. And even if I know succession planning in organizations is a thing, but probably not to the same extent. That could person A, if person A goes, could person B jump in straight away? Well, no, because they've not been through the management development program or X, Y, Z. So how much of it in the military is like the operating model? How much of it is like, well, we've got nominated individual that we're going to take through some training so they are ready to step up when needed? Or is it just kind of a second nature thing?
Second nature, it's the mentality, the mindset. It's there, and that's where you can go into any scenario. If you look at the standards of the military, they're parachuted in. They're often given vague information. They haven't got a solid plan most of the time, but they are able to navigate complexity, vague instructions, understand the mission, translate it to their junior ranks, deliver, move on. And that's what you need in most corporates when you think about it in reality. But we spend so much money and time on planning, thinking we get the right people in. Succession planning is not quite there. So if that person has to go suddenly, we then faffing around trying to find the right person. Often we'll make a mistake of putting someone in the role who actually is not the right fit, not just necessarily experience, but character-wise. If you're perhaps maybe you've not managed 3 generations lower, how do you make sure that person's able to get that team to deliver? And I've seen that fracture quite differently, because the leadership standards of someone older is a bit different to somebody younger, and that needs to be managed as well. So I think if I look at the military, irrespective of rank, backgrounds, they have that training to be able to get people on side, influence, let's lead, let me show you where we're going. And we do it when we go on to operations into different countries, hearts and minds. That's so important. It's not just delivery, it's how do you emotionally get the civilians on side as well, and that sort of stuff.
It's so interesting, because I think in many walks of life, outside of work, military included, is that you kind of have those parameters in which you can lead, influence, and build trust. But for whatever reason, you get inside a corporate environment and all of that goes out the window. It's like a completely different ball game. I think one of the things whilst you were talking as well was that it's the group understanding, like this. For want of a better word, there's that community element, right? That we all know why we're here and what we're trying to achieve and what the rules of the game we operate in as a team. And that goes down to your succession planning in the military, right? That you are able to step into those shoes should you need to. Because you don't need to say, oh, if you're going to be at this leadership position, you need to know how to use our performance management software and fill out a form. It's a lot more nuanced than that. But what you've almost got is this element of the group being able to manage themselves, essentially. So yes, there is a leader, but the group are managing themselves by their actions and their behaviors. Which, like, I go back to the thing I think I said at the beginning, that's incredibly hard to do at a large scale. So in that world, regardless if you've got 30 people or 30,000 people, you've got to allow the leaders to create autonomy for that group to act in the best possible way. If you try and define that, it seems like it's going against every piece of advice you are telling us on this live stream today.
Absolutely. So maybe looking at it in a way that you have a set of standards and behaviours. Maria shows up as one individual, Emily shows up as another. We have our way of interpreting it, but actually how we translate it is still positive of what the value is about. If Emily ignores that value and then does something to contradict it, then that's what fragments your culture. And so the point I'm trying to say is you've got a set of values. They're like central. They guide you, they're guidance. And then you take them as an individual and you go, okay, I get what this means. this is for me about what being an inclusive leader means. I role model that in my way, where in my meetings, I'm always asking for opinions, I'm making sure I'm transparent, I'm acknowledging people, blah, blah, blah. Where it tends to fracture is when leaders take those values and they do the opposite. And that's where you get the mixed messages. So I think you can have a central set of values like the military. We interpret them in our way from different cultural backgrounds, different ages, but we know what they mean in essence. And then that's how you get that standard that everybody understands and doesn't go below. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. I do think one of the problems we have is that those values are not always so clearly codified. Sometimes you've got values and they're just kind of wishy-washy words, and they don't really mean anything. I worked at a place and our whole thing was "we're on." You're like, what does that even mean? Like, it was retail. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. And then people didn't really know how that translated and what that meant in terms of how we should show up. And it's making that link between this is what our values are, and this is what it means for you, and this is what consistently showing up with those values looks like. But I have a different question for you. I mean, it's connected. You say that when a leader goes against the values, be that their personal values or the organizational values, that's when we fracture trust. But what other kinds of behaviors destroy trust really quickly that are still socially acceptable that we see all the time in corporate life?
Well, I have a few. So I think looking at the 5 generations, I know my generation. So I grew up with, if a senior leader talked, you listened, irrespective if you agreed with them or not. Neutrality often read as fairness, but actually it reads as distance now and avoidance. You often have performance in big companies, process and governance. Leaders used to hide behind that in my day. It was always, well, the policy says this and the process says this. Now, people don't care about the policy and process. It's about their experience and how you make them feel. And those things I've noticed have changed significantly in the radical visibility term, because that's what leadership had. That's all gone now. Not wanting to go on about what AI is changing because we know what it can do. But the stuff it can't do is turning back for someone, making that human judgment, that critical thinking. They're the skills now that are being judged by leaders that tech can't do. And that's the thing now that is really sort of have changed the old school of leadership. Because the amount of times I've seen process being the shield, HR being the shield for leaders not owning stuff and actually stepping in and saying, look, we had to make this decision. We didn't plan particularly well last year. There's a consequence of that, but we own that. We'll make sure we're not going to do it again. There'll be some other market conditions and blurb, and the people know the truth. They're kind of sitting there going, okay, well, this doesn't really add up. So I think that being honest and transparent with people is key as well around leadership and how leadership has changed today, really.
Do you still hear people giving advice, like leadership advice, that you think is actively harmful? Or would you say that actually, no, most people are on the same sort of page, the things that you're talking about these days?
I think we're a little bit behind around if a leader says something, we need to listen. I've heard that a lot. Well, it is what it is. So and so has said this. We just need to get on with it. I think there's a lot of conflicting messages around be yourself, challenge the status quo, speak up. And then actually, you've got another message around, well, the leaders set the tone. This is what we need to do. So which one is it? And I think that old school of rank having the final say, I think that's slowly diluting, and relevance. You can have a title, right? So your rank can get you in the room. It's actually how you behave that gets you to stay at that table, because it's all about followership. Going back to conforming and followership. Most leaders want to be liked. most leaders want to be trusted. They don't want to be disliked or, So I think it's thinking like that around, how do I build trust with my people, not compromising myself or them, and then respecting me as their leader. But actually, it works both ways. And I think sometimes the old leadership school of thought is, well, I'm a leader, and this is how we need to do it. And I'm not sure with 5 generations now that's going to last too long.
Well, I think also the thing that most leaders struggle with, and we know this from some of the work that we've done, is that radical visibility is very easy to do in an in-office environment, because it's how you walk around, who you talk to, how you show up in the morning, and all that kind of stuff. But in a virtual environment, you can go missing. You can go missing very, very easily. You may appear at the meetings. I mean, my wife works in an organization where they still don't have cameras on in their meetings. Absolutely baffles me. Absolutely baffles me. And so even in that very simple situation, a leader is hiding. Essentially, there isn't that, you're reducing the opportunity for connection. But even if you then go into something like, a Microsoft Teams channel or a Slack channel or a WhatsApp group or whatever, like, there is that distance, and most don't choose the opportunity to engage in that in anything other than a transactional way. And if you look at social media content creators and influencers, what do? They are able to build that connection and followership in a digital way without literally no in-person stuff, because they don't get to meet all their hundreds or millions or thousands of followers or whatever. And so I think when you talk about the generational shifts, right? We're in this period of work where you have to be able to do both. You have to be able to have this radical visibility in person, but you also have to do it in a virtual environment. And they're both equally as important. You can't do one or the other just because you're from a particular generation or that's your experience or anything like that. Because the emerging generations of the workforce, Gen Z, are here already, right? Let's stop talking about them like they're coming. They're here. It's Gen Alpha, which will even be these uber digital natives that kind of go, well, why doesn't my leader interact with these social channels like I do? It's very peculiar. So I don't know if I've necessarily got a question there, but the question I would ask is there a military equivalent of like a Microsoft Teams or a Slack channel? Like, do you have digital collaboration and communication at all?
I don't know, because I've been out now for 20 years, so I'm not sure. But I think in terms of going to your social media piece and the influencers, that's a really good point. Because if you look at how they communicate with people, the choice of words they use, they're often quite vulnerable and also personable. Sometimes we lose that with rank and title. We distance. And I think if you look at algorithms and things, especially LinkedIn, what it's picking up, it's all around connection and how you're drawing people in to comment, to like, oh, I relate to this person. They seem quite trustworthy. It's exactly the same with leadership. And radical visibility doesn't mean about being in a room. It's the small, everyday moments when people aren't watching. That's radical visibility. And over time, those build. And that's what does the earn, protect, rebuild. It's the small moments, consistency.
Which takes a lot of mindfulness, isn't it? It's something that you just sparked a thought in me. I was thinking about like parenting, obviously very different from leadership, right? But it's how you show how you are there, even when you think your kids aren't watching, because they're always watching, even if you think they aren't, and they pretend they can't, they're not listening to you, but they kind of are listening to you. And one thing I see all the time is like parents on their phones. I'm just like, I do it too sometimes, and then I'm like, no, I'm actively on a like crusade of myself and in my family, being like, right, put your phones away, because the kids will see it, and then they'll start echoing that behavior. You said earlier, behaviors compound, right? And then they'll copy, and then they'll do those kind of things. And I think it's very visible because children don't have a filter in the same way, right? They just come out with stuff. But I think it's probably much the same, isn't it, with adults? So it's a useful analogy.
Yeah, I think it's that self-awareness, being very present. I remember talking to a colleague who was experiencing some mental health challenges, and that we were encouraged at the time to speak to your people leader, if you know struggling with workload, etc. And they decided to be vulnerable and share that they were struggling a bit, and their leader was checking emails while they were talking. So they're on camera, they're talking to the person, and they could see the eye movement that the person was checking the second screen and WhatsApping or whatever someone. And going back to your point with children, people pick up on, you think that you're talking to me, but you can see the other thing, the distraction and the lack of focus. And that's again radical visibility. All of those small things depend whether I trust you. Am I going to come back to you again and tell you this? Probably not. Because you just says I'm there for you. You're just box ticking because you're not really, because you're too bothered about answering other people instead of being there for me in that moment. So I think all of these things are really quite important now with hybrids, and we have to try harder with people than we did face to face in the office. Like you said, Toby, it's hard because we're on camera. We can't always pick up on those nuances we would in a room. But that's where, as a leader, stepping up is really key around how do I make sure I check in, even if it's a little message or something to let that person know they're kind of not alone.
I think it brings me to my personal crusade about blurred backgrounds on calls. Like, that inherently creates this distrust. It's like, you could show me what's in your background. Look, and there are some instances where you probably absolutely need to blur the background. I can't think of many.
I can think of one. Literally
Okay.
yesterday, my 6-year-old, my sister was looking after him. My husband's on a call. I wasn't, fortunately. He comes walking up after the toilet. He's lost my sister and he's not wearing any pants. And I'm just like, oh my days, you're 6. Like, quick, shut the door. What are you doing? But there's not many of those. It's half term. Everything is half term and it's hot. Okay, everything is crazy.
So,
but apart from that,
I wasn't expecting like that straight out of the gate. It's like, oh, I got one. But like, there is there are these digital cues that you could do that create this inherent distrust, right? It's like, well, what are you hiding? And it's not that you're necessarily intentionally hiding anything, but you are hiding something. So how can I fully trust you? And then you got people who go the other way and went, well, I'm going to make my background look like a 12-year-old YouTuber's background. But like, there is intent there to break those barriers. I think that one of the biggest things, and it's so hard to do, is eye contact, right? Because you two are here. I'm pointing down here, but the thing to make eye contact with you, I have to be here, but you're here. So that whole connection piece is really difficult to do, but you have to do it. You have to do it because otherwise, if you don't do it, then you're not creating that connection. I'm like a dog with a bone, but I'm gonna have to do some research to see if like the military are on Slack or something like that. But I don't like. There must just be WhatsApp groups. I don't know, because then you can't have like information just going through WhatsApp about what the military personnel are doing.
Social groups, but I'm not sure. I mean, if you look at them, they're not sat in an office. They're not on computers. They're not in front of a screen. So maybe the human-centered, old-fashioned way of chatting to each other, conversation, is what is the golden answer. Who knows?
Yeah. There's a whole podcast episode in that conversation alone. I was about to say, do they just use walkie-talkies? I think they're called probably radios, not walkie-talkies. Sorry, my daughter's birthday was last week. She got walkie-talkies. It's top of mind. But we'll finish with this. I sent someone a LinkedIn message this morning, and it was a voice note, and they said, I just really don't like voice notes, and they gave a really good explanation why. And I was like, fair enough. And I typed this back. But one of the arguments was that it's a very transactional. It's not a conversation. It gives you the illusion of conversation. You're delivering these sometimes in mine and Emily's chats 5 to 10 minute monologues, which kind of serve the individual. They don't allow for better conversation. So I mean, all joking aside, a radio or a walkie-talkie, you are having that call and response. You're having that conversation. That is almost as good as being in person. Whereas a WhatsApp message, written or voice note, is still that it's post, essentially what it is. I will send something and it will arrive to you at a given time, and then I will respond to it. So, yeah, the good old-fashioned way of just talking to people.
So one final question for you, Maria. if you were gonna, anybody watching, listening, who is a leader, what kind of advice or what can they take from you and that they can start applying to either, build trust, maintain trust, rebuild trust with their teams?
Yeah, just be aware people don't follow your title, they follow the evidence of your behavior. And that choice changes when pressure hits. So they make a choice in that moment. I think if you want to stay relevant, because leadership is fading in terms of the leadership standards are shifting of what's needed now, is a conscious daily awareness of earn, protect, rebuild with the people around you. And I think if you can get into that rhythm, you'll prove through consistency, you'll build that trust, and you'll be able to lead your people through anything.
Nice. Very nice.
That's very good. Like, I think anybody who's listened or watched this will just reach out to Maria, because I think having spoken to people in the military before who then transitioned into kind of supporting corporate leadership, I've never met anyone who's able to put it in such practical, real terms. There is that element where you can take elements of here and do it here. So with that in mind, if people do want to see, hear, read more about the stuff you're doing, Maria, where do they find you?
LinkedIn. I think that's the most easiest place to find me. I have a website, Trust by Design, but it's all on my LinkedIn profile. So they can find me there and DM me if they have any questions.
Lovely stuff. And what we do here on the podcast is we then go to your LinkedIn profile, because what we look at is your URL. Is your URL linkedin.com/in/Maria James? No, it's not. And it's not Maria James 61 or 31, or you're not numbered. You've been very shrewd, and you are Maria E. James. So your middle name
Yes.
begins with an E, I'm guessing. You didn't just put a
Elaine.
random E in there. Elaine.
Elaine.
So if you want to follow Maria, it's Maria E. James is the one you're looking for in the URL, or just search Maria James. Both me and Emily are connected with her. You will find her lickety split. And Trust by Design. Doing absolutely amazing stuff. Maria, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And for everyone listening and watching, this has been another episode of Freeformers Unplugged. We'll see you at 1 p.m. UK time next week. Have a good weekend, all.